Hi, good morning, everyone. Ian Andrews from Lakewood Alive here with you. Thanks for joining us today for Prepping Gardens for Spring Success, the continuation of our Knowing Your Home series in virtual format. We're really glad that you're with us. We're going to give it a little bit of time to let folks enter the room, and then we will begin in just a few moments. Be back with you in a bit. Good morning again. Ian Andrews here with you from Lakewood Alive. Thanks for joining us today. Just waiting for folks to file into the room, if you will, and we'll be back with you in just a few moments. Hi, friends. Ian Andrews back here with you. We're just going to go one more minute. Please just allow a little bit of time for the rest of the folks who signed up to jump on with us. But we've got Paul from Lakewood Garden Center. He's all ready to go. He's got a real great presentation. Allison, our Housing and Internal Operations Director, she's ready to go. So we'll get started here. Let's just go one more minute, and then we'll kick it off. Okay, friends, let's get started. My name is Ian Andrews. I'm with Lakewood Alive. Really thrilled that you're here today. It's a beautiful day, so thanks for spending some time in front of your computer about an outdoor topic, prepping gardens for spring success, continuation of our Knowing Your Home series. We've got Paul from Lakewood Garden Center. We'll get to Paul in just a moment, but first I want to introduce Allison Urbanic. Allison is our Housing and Internal Operations Director. And the Knowing Your Home series is really her brainchild, and she's done a great job pulling together not only a great series, but then to continue it during a pandemic. So we're thrilled you're here. Allison, go ahead, take it away.
Good morning. Thank you, Ian. Can you hear me all right?
Loud and clear. Go right ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this beautiful Saturday. As I look out my window, I'm thinking of all of the things I'm going to do this afternoon, probably mow the grass. So it's very fitting today to have this workshop of getting our gardens ready for winter and then setting ourselves up for success in the spring. So as Ian mentioned, this is our 11th virtual webinar, which is pretty exciting because before the pandemic in 2020, we had never hosted a webinar before, and now I think we're pretty much pros at that. So thank you all for making us part of your day. So we're excited to have Paul from Lakewood Garden Center join us, and he's going to share his expertise. for what he's learned throughout the gardening season and things that he's learned from all of you who come and visit him at the garden center, and then help us use that knowledge to set us up for success in the spring. So, Paul, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning. One question I have for you, Allison, that we didn't cover beforehand. Are you going to feed me questions? I have the chat box collapsed.
Absolutely, Paul. That's my very favorite thing, is to really interrupt and get involved with the presentation. So I will be asking you questions along the way, and that's a really great segue into this. So we are taking questions. There is a little thought bubble on the right side of your screen. If you click on that, that will open up the chat box, and that will allow you to send questions to me, which I will then ask of Paul. So please ask us questions. We want to use that to help guide our conversation and really get to the best knowledge we possibly can. So thank you, Paul. So yes, I will be interjecting and asking questions throughout the presentation.
All right, sounds good. Well, you guys can see the title slide here, and we'll just jump right into it. So if you could move us forward, Ian. So the preparation for this presentation was pretty simple, and I think I learned as much this year as I have in a while. We moved into a new home last summer, and this year was the first year we had really established a garden. The cool thing that I do is I garden for a living, and you know, when this all became pretty evident that we were going to be spending time you know, segregated from each other as you know, it developed, I was able to get on the phone and call some of the partners we work with at the store and kind of throw together an impromptu vegetable garden that was decently thought out, averagely executed, and was really successful. But one thing I'm going to kind of share with you guys today is how we're going to make some changes to what we've done, and hopefully you can take something away from that and make some changes to your own garden. We can bump forward. So, you know, I kind of took myself back to where we were, you know, in March of this year. And, you know, the first thing was the panic and the nervousness of a lot of what was going on. And you know, in my mind, we were all dying. I was certainly going out of business. And at that point, I wouldn't have any money. And I would probably be super busy going out of business without any money. And the easiest and probably safest bet in terms of having food for myself and my family was to grow our own. You know, and we were able to clear out this area where you see the smart beds laying. And get this little concept of a garden started. You know, the first lesson I learned right away is if you see to the left of the garden, there's a downspout. I mistakenly extended a lot of water into my basement for the first rainstorm. That was oops. And that was, you know, right away a pretty good lesson. Make sure all your water connections are tight, and your basement will be much happier. We can go to the next one, Ian. One thing we really wanted to prepare for in our yard was the dog here. This is Cash. He's our new pup. But within, I don't know, 10 minutes of having that soil placed in those beds, he was in the beds digging and having a great time, and it really became evident that we were going to need a pretty good structure to keep him out of the bed. So we can bump. We'll move ahead, Ian. And you know, kind of with the mindset of there was going to be serious issues coming, and I didn't want to put a lot of money into my structure. We started looking around the house to see what we had. I was able to find a fair amount of used 2x4s that we'd salvaged from another project. I was able to get some chicken wire at Lakewood Hardware, and this is really a super easy, and it's turned out to be a really effective way to keep, you know, the dog. There's rabbits, and deer would come from the other side, the street side, but we've been able to keep the garden relatively pest free. The squirrels have actually left us alone for the most part as well. But everything there except for the chicken wire is salvaged or reused stuff, and it turned out to be a really effective way to protect what we were growing. I talk about the structure, and I think that we try to get away as gardeners without, you know, spending an hour or two to really protect our investment, and then we spend maybe another month tending to our plants, and then all of a sudden we find out that we have not kept the critters out, and we have trouble with all of our efforts, and find that other animals are harvesting our crops. We'll bump Ian. So one thing I really wanted to show you guys a little bit were these smart pots that we used. They were the gang at Smart Pot was willing to meet me in the middle on these beds, and we used them. I've used them in the past and had great success with them, and it was really cool to partner with them, and the success that we had this year with these beds has been absolutely incredible. It's a fabric bag, so here in the next month we're going to collapse everything and put it right away for the winter. We'll salvage some of the soil if it looks salvageable, but you know, that whole garden will return to a blank slate, and you're looking at a tomato plant that we did up at the garden center with a jalapeno on the right hand side. We'll move. Actually, we'll stay here for 1 second, Ian. The other thing that we did with relative success, and we'll get to a failure, a slight failure next year, is if you look at the tomato in the background, you'll see the trellis netting against the wall to have what I was calling throughout the summer the biggest tomato plant in Lakewood. I think at its highest point of production, we had about 30 clusters of tomatoes on that plant, and it's really done a nice job producing. I would assume that plant would keep a family of 4 in tomatoes for the entire summer with excess available for the neighbors. Let's bump forward, Ian.
Hey, Paul, before we go forward, can we go back for just one moment, Ian? So I just wanted to ask Paul, so with these garden beds, and you may get to it, and if so, just let me know. You can see kind of the mildew at the bottom. Obviously, that's probably normal. Is there anything that we need to do with that bottom area before we kind of wrap everything up for the winter?
I won't this year. I'd keep an eye on them and see how it goes. Usually drying them out takes away most of the problems. If it turns out to be a real excessive buildup of the minerals, my plan would be just to throw them in the washing machine. I don't think I would dry them, but they are very washable, or a pressure washer would do a nice job on them as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, so if you take a look at the progressions here, the left is slightly after planting. It looks relatively established, but one thing I like to do is start with bigger plants. It's easier for me to keep them, and by starting with bigger plants, I also start a little bit later than the majority of the public does. So what you're looking at is a pretty new planting but just with larger plants. Towards the bottom of the picture on the left, you'll see the squash. I got a little stir crazy during the early stages of the pandemic, and maybe got ahead of myself with the seeds a little bit. So the squash was chomping at the bit to get in the garden, probably the first week of June when we put this in, or the last week of May. And then the picture on the right is just kind of an illustration of the progression. We did end up losing most of the zucchini and the squash on the right-hand side to powdery mildew and vine borer. We fought the battle with the cucumber beetle pretty heavily. But what's really evident in the right-hand side is I'm going to very soon have trouble easily walking around my garden and watering it and tending to it and harvesting it. The stakes wind up being a little bit difficult and maybe a little bit late to the game when I finally got them in, and it really, created some problems that I would have liked to have avoided. Snapping branches off when you're dragging the hose, stepping on fruit that ends up hanging on the ground was something I'm doing to this day. And, I think that the proximity of the plants and the density of them gave the squash some issues fighting off powdery mildew and made it a little bit easier for insects to hide. So, and the tomato that you're looking at, I now refer to as the Leaning Tower of Pizza, as he's probably closer to the ground than he is to the 90-degree angle we'd like to see him at. Go ahead, Ian.
So, hey, Paul, can I ask you about the squash and the zucchini? So my plants also, I think I got maybe 3 or 4 zucchini, and then they ended up dying, probably from the borer and the mold. Is that something that so I bought a powder, a bonide powder, but I think it was too late. Is that something that we should be fighting from the very beginning, or you're just SOL if your plants get that? Or can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. When you have it, when you've acquired the mildew, you're kind of just fighting it off until the plant succumbs or you get to the winter part of the process. We generally suggest pinching off infected leaves. I've used the powder. I can't say if the powder that you see on those leaves is the copper fungicide or if that's the diatomaceous earth we were using on the beetles. But preventative measures certainly do go a long way. One thing we're going to do in the garden next year is trim out some more of the shrubs in the background. The lilacs are traditionally, great breeders of powdery mildew, and it spreads pretty easily. And at my house, those squash or the zucchini are just a little bit south of the lilacs in a wind tunnel. So I'm pretty sure that's how it's spread at my house. And then every time you get in there with an unsterile set of pruners, or you're not washing your hands and you're going from a diseased plant to a healthy plant, that's a way you're going to spread disease. And you can help eliminate a lot of that by being proactive with the fungicides. Absolutely.
Great. Okay, so I didn't even think about that. I know we're going off on a little tangent here, but I wear the same pair of gardening gloves all the time, and I'm going from plant to plant. I don't like my hands getting dirty. I know that's ridiculous, but so I wear gloves. So is that something I need to think about, going with my gloves from plant to plant?
Yeah, a trip through the washing machine would eliminate any residual disease on your gloves. But yeah, your pruners, even your the end of the hose when you're watering, if you use a wand or whatever sort of instrument you use to assist you in that, can definitely help spread the disease.
That's really fascinating. Thank you so much. I had no clue. All right. Sorry for getting us off on a tangent.
So next picture here is my cucumbers. Cucumbers are sometimes a difficult crop to grow. the bug on the right is the cucumber beetle. They're continually after the cucumbers, and they inject disease into the plant, and for the reason of only being on the spot right now, the disease is eluding me. I believe it's a wilt of some sort. And the longer you can keep those at bay, the more cucumbers you'll get, and the better your harvest will be. And then not keeping them in the same space year after year, and if you end up having them, they do have a tendency to overwinter in the soil. So you may want to consider starting fresh with the soil if you've dealt with that, and eliminating the soil is a possibility. What I chose to do was eliminate the plants after they were pretty well devastated, and we've turned that small bed into peas and beans and lettuce and carrots at this point. So we wrote it out, and it worked out at a pretty good time. I think we put up 12, 14 jars of pickles for the remainder of the year, and I suspect that'll get us through till next spring, when we can actually get back after it and, start growing cukes again. We can bump through on that. So one thing I've kind of known for a while, and sorry guys, I kind of minimized the whole thing here. There we go, I'm back. Is the value of gardening in the city is sometimes a little bit different than what you might see in different areas. And the one thing I'd really like everybody to see in these two pictures is one, not only beautiful thriving plants, but that what the concrete and the pavement have allowed these plants to do, and ultimately, at the picture on the left is at Hayes Elementary School. They do an adopt a spot program when you pull in, and the flowers really just do a nice job with a little bit of amendment. We planted some flowers with our children up there this spring, and the weather has been perfect. And the pavement keeping that stuff warm, and it's got an adequate soil bed to support it. And then just with volunteer watering, that's what you're able to come up with is an absolutely beautiful piece, and a great thing for children and teachers and anybody who's going to a school to see, is like, hey, these people care about what's going on, and the pavement just gives it that much extra of a bump. On the right hand side, you'll see a progression of the tomato plant, and this is probably at the peak of it, but it's such a wonderful place to grow tomatoes. It sits on concrete in the middle of an asphalt parking lot up against a brick building, and we've really kind of pruned that tomato to allow the sun to hit the fruits, but you can see how large, what we were calling the large tomato plant in Lakewood actually became. There's one tomato plant in that picture, and there's two peppers, and the ability for the tomato to sit on the concrete against the masonry really gives it a jump start, in the respect that you want to look at your tomatoes as a tropical vine. And when you do that and you provide it with the heat that it's looking for in consistent moisture, you don't need many tomato plants. So we can bump through there. You can there we go. There's my one of my important lessons. We're getting some of those driving rains that we had, and it really became evident that I hadn't strung the trellis high enough to support the plant, and a few of the storms pretty much knocked that thing down pretty heavily. We didn't do much with it other than you know, continue to let it grow. Now it's more or less just growing back to the ground. The harvest is great. There's still probably 20 tomatoes on it that can be picked this afternoon. The basil has done nothing but just grow and grow in front of it. And I've got enough sandwich peppers out of the Hungarian pepper on the left, and the tomato plant in the picture on the left has pretty much swallowed the jalapeno. But, you know, we've been able to get a wonderful harvest out of, you know, those 3 plants, and combined with the basil, we need no peppers. And, you know, by the time we finish up this fall, we won't have any need for any tomatoes throughout the winter. There's basil put away. And, you know, the big lesson, I think, is when you look at this, you want to provide your plants with the infrastructure for them to be successful, and for your gardening experience to be enjoyable. And that's really something that I've taken away from what we've done and accomplished this year. Is in the next month, we're gonna figure out how that trellis gets, you know, 10, 12 feet up in the air on the building next year. We're going to, you know, remove the smart pots from the garden bed at the house, and eliminate that we're going to go with a more permanent raised bed system, so that when I'm 70 years old, I can garden with ease and less stress on my back and knees. And we're looking at putting in some irrigation so we don't have to drag the hose, and you know, we can automate some of the water process, and really just kind of make the process a lot less demanding on me and my family in terms of who's watering this stuff when we can't get to it. We can move forward.
Okay, so Paul, I do have a question, 2 questions about the ginormous tomato plant. So you learned obviously a really important lesson that, you know, your ginormous tomato plant, you know, grew larger than your trellis system, and then also you needed to maybe reinforce it a little bit. If that happens again to us, like if our plants just get larger than we think they're going to, is there anything we can do, you know, mid-season to keep them growing up? Or is it just we have to take mental notes and prepare for next year?
It really gets difficult to kind of be reactive. It's one thing we see year in and year out at the store, and it kind of gets frustrating to us, you know, because we deal with the same issues on such a consistent basis. And really the answer is to do the prep work ahead of time. And, you know, the way the weather works in Cleveland, the next time you get to do prep work in your garden could be the same day you want to plant it. You know, so I think it's important that you consider what sort of successes and failures you've had over the summer, and making the changes in the next, you know, 6 weeks. There's been years when you could work in the garden well into, you know, December, and, you know, there's been Januaries you could work in it the whole time. You know, I think the important part is to see what you did, and it's tough to do it reactively. Proactive measures, you know, especially when you're dealing with a you know, potentially a 10 to 12 foot tall tomato plant, are tough to do without damaging the plant.
Okay, and then one other question. So with your smart pots, sorry if that's not the correct term for the name of them, how often were you fertilizing those throughout the season? And would that be different in that type of pot versus a traditional clay pot or a regular bed that's in the ground?
We think that you might get a little bit longer fertilization schedule out of the ground, because you're not flushing the container of nutrients nearly as much. But, you know, the way we look at fertilization is, you know, probably we try to stay on 3 weeks. Sometimes it stretches to a month, but the fertilizer most of the organic fertilizers, the slow release, will feed for at least a month continually. So if you go through every 3 weeks with a Plantone or a Happy Frog fertilizer, you're gonna supply the plant with proper nutrients to grow. And then, you know, the other thing, which I'm sure a lot of people are coming into right now, is called blossom end rot. And that's a black spot on the end of the tomato. So at the initial time of plant, we like to use a slow release all-purpose organic, and we also like to supplement it with a bone meal or a lime. And what that does is it just provides the plant with what we would consider to be a glass of milk. It makes sure that it has nutrient for strong fruit and strong flesh, and you get good fruit set, and you end up with a better harvest. So, you know, long answer short, every 3 weeks with a slow release all-purpose organic, and then every 6 with a bone meal or a lime.
Great, thank you.
I think we can bump through. Yep, there we go. The picture on the left here is the front edge of my garden after we had removed the squash. You can see the Leaning Tower of Pizza is well on his way to the ground. You know, proper staking was a weak point of mine this year, and it was reactive, and we didn't have success with it because I didn't do it when we were installing, or even before that point. Every year the season for plant supports is usually 3 weeks to a month behind the season for planting them. And I think that, you know, what we're going to look at doing is installing posts in our new raised beds, and having a trellis system permanently installed, so that even if you know, we don't want to have the trellis, we can just remove the trellis from the stakes or the posts and grow something different. But a trellis system can be so valuable in a garden, and it doesn't have to be a super complex or expensive item, and it adds such a great benefit when you're not worrying about where you're tying your tomatoes or your eggplant. You know, peppers, you could also, you know, allow your squash or your beans or your peas to climb it. And that's something that's definitely going to be a part of our garden.
Are you there, Paul?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, I think we had a little bit of a blip with your coverage there. We heard that your the trellis system was going to be a part of your gardening plan for next year, and then I think it cut out for just a moment.
Yeah, and it tells me my connection has been restored. So if being redundant, just cut me off whenever. But you know, the trellis just adds a lot of value to the garden, and we're going to look at a permanent one, which is basically probably just going to be a couple of 4x4s, you know, sunk or you know, attached at ground level or to the deck, and we'll string a trellis in between those, and you know, we'll be able to work off of those 4x4s for the next, you know, 10, 20 years, and we'll solve the problem for probably $30, and you know, really just make life a lot easier, and it's something we won't have to worry about year after year, and we can rotate crops around them and use the trellis to support different you know, plants such as, you know, peas and squash and cucumbers, and as long as, or as well as your peppers and tomatoes and things of the sort. Do you believe
Great.
we've caught up?
Yes, we're all caught up now. Thank you.
Cool. So the tomato on the right, I never got a stake into. I've been referring to that one as Flat Stanley. He grows straight down out of the pot, and we've lost a lot of his fruits simply just because the fence is so close to the plant, and the aisle, as the plant grew, became smaller and smaller, and I'm not as agile as I used to be, and I'll bet you I've stepped on a half dozen fruit that I didn't even realize were buried underneath the foliage there. And just casualties to the garden, and really, to again, we're going to take all this out. We're going to put in permanent raised beds. I hope to give away a few of these smart pots at the store when we're done with them, so you guys can use them and see exactly how wonderful they are to use. And then we're going to have proper spacing, we're going to have proper irrigation, and we're going to have the infrastructure in place so that when next spring comes, we might have to add soil, but the majority of the work's going to be done, and it's going to be a pleasant experience that involves planting and walking away, so we can bump forward. Fall crops are what we're doing, and the importance of these pictures is if you look at the overhead on the left, you can see the difference in the size of it's arugula down there with some peas coming through. The arugula that is larger is south facing, so that section of wood takes the sun the majority of the day, and it's amazing that while you think these things are in the same container with the same sunlight facing the same direction, the face and the heat that wood provides the arugula on the south side is probably at this point allowed it to grow at double the rate of the stuff that's on the north side and is not getting the direct sun on the roots or the soil. And the picture on the right is just a reiteration of the same concept. If you look, you can see the house in the background on the right-hand side. I want to say that's Swiss chard. I have that in a box that I can actually flip and rotate, but the side that's incredibly larger was planted at the same time as the smaller side, and that box can't be much more than a foot wide. But when the taller side was facing south, it took all the advantage from the sun and the heat in the soil that the plastic provided, and it really makes a huge difference. So people talk to us all the time about these sort of things, and just a small amount of space with a little bit different sunlight does make a huge difference. So if you can keep that in mind when you're planting your gardens, you'll make your life a little bit easier, and you can have a more consistent crop. We can move through it. So now we're going to kind of transition more into the yard. I guess I should, give you guys a quick second if there are any questions, about more of the edible gardening. It'd be a good time to take those.
So right now, most of our questions are about flowers. So I think we can hold off on those. But if anyone does have a question about edible things, please feel free to send those over now so we can get them up and going. Are we going to talk about the beds that our garden beds, and if there's anything we should do to get them ready for next spring, or are we closing in on our information about gardens at this point?
We'll get back to some soil prep and garden prep. We could touch on it real briefly. Full transparency, I can't remember exactly if I cover that later in the show. Life has been pretty busy, but we'll Ian, if you take us back a couple to maybe just a good picture or two of the vegetable garden, keep going one more, that'll work. Back to the forward one. Perfect. So a couple big items, like we touched on, removing the soil that the cucumber beetle had infected as a way to eliminate that or reduce the quantity of it. I suspect it's down in the garden. I'm not going to be able to eliminate that. Removal and proper disposal of diseased or sick plants is a big thing. Keeping a relatively clean garden, trying not to let fruit rot in there as we get into the colder part of the season helps eliminate potential overwintering of disease. really good cleanups go a long way. And that's really the key thing. I'm not a huge fan of adding fertilizer to a vegetable garden at the end of the season. I think if you want to work the soil, it's a great time to work composts or manures into it. And, that would be, the main extent of the fall garden cleanup is just to, do a nice job cleaning up anything that's left over and not having a surplus of infected foliage lying around in the garden. So I think we can go.
So Paul, is there anything that we can move in for the winter? So like our herbs or, lavender or anything, does anything that we're growing out there need to come inside if we want to use it again next year, or should we just leave it and let it winter outside? Any suggestions on that? Maybe the perennials that can come back.
Okay. The majority of my vegetable garden, I believe I have a customer or two growing probably everything inside. It's not for those who don't want to have a relatively serious commitment to their eggplant or their peppers. Every spring we work through the process of reacclimating them to the outside in the spring with customers. And I think for the most part, if I was looking to bring something in, I'd focus more on the herbs and trying to transition those. I think I would be doing that now. The majority of my herbs are going into they're coming into the house, but they're coming into the house as prepared to being processed. We've chopped a lot of basil. We have that in the freezer. I've dehydrated trays and trays of tomatoes and eggplant and parsley and thyme. So we've pretty much put all our spices up for the winter at this point. I've got a lot of peppers that have been dehydrated that I'll turn into chili powder here. I find that to be a much easier way. I don't think you're going to have the success bringing a tomato or a pepper back outside in the spring like you think you might. And it's certainly going to end up being a process that is going to be at least, probably 3 to 4 days of getting it acclimated to being outdoors again. And I know I've worked with a lot of people that actually get the plants through the winter with relative health, and then when they bring them back out, they kill them that way. And I can't think of much worse than getting something through the winter in the house and having good success with that and spending a lot of time loving it. And then, you put it outside and you fry it in the sun because it hasn't seen the sun for, 4 months, or we got cold that night and the plant just wasn't ready for 40s or mid 30s. And now you're starting from scratch anyhow.
Sure. Now, we did have some questions of what herbs will overwinter. Anything that we can leave? I know I always leave my rosemary out, and it seems to do well unless we have a really cold winter. Anything else that would winter well where it's at?
We've had pretty good success overwintering parsley, lavender, basil's definitely going to be a goner. You should be able to get a lot of thymes through the winter. Rosemary, yeah, that's kind of hit or miss. We had a super mild winter last year, and I know we had a lot of people have a lot of success getting their herbs back or having them, start up again this spring. The one sometimes sacrifice that you may have to consider is a lot of people say the taste and the herbs in year 2 or year 3 is a lot different than it is the first year. I personally, I'm not in favor of you know, putting away bad oregano because I didn't want to drop 350, you know, on a new one for the coming year. To me, that the cost, you know, covers the risk with pretty good distance to spare. Trying to think of what other herbs I might be forgetting here. Chives, I believe. No problem. Go ahead.
How about sage?
Sage. You know, common sage should overwinter pretty well. I believe there's, you know, like the pineapple sages and the tricolor sages don't make it. Not to say that you can't get them back, but on, you know, as a rule of thumb, I'd consider the more tropical sages or the later blooming sages to be, you know, not a good bet in terms of returning.
Great. And then one other question we have about beds is a question from Emily, and she's asking, do you use cover crops in the winter to kind of protect your beds?
I personally don't. I think it's a great idea. For me, the process of turning a cover crop into the ground and then waiting is a draw on time that I don't necessarily have. You know, with my job being, you know, at the garden center and you know, the peak of it is, you know, they kind of coincide in time. You want to be getting those cover crops out of the ground. Now at our farm, I'm certainly considering that, and that would be a you know, a multi-year crop, and it may just end up being ryegrass. Honey, you need to walk out of here right now. Thank you. Sorry, my daughter was joining us briefly there. You know, so there's a lot of value in that. You know, but we also use crops that kind of help fix the soil throughout the season. You can do that with things like beans, and the constant fertilization helps. But, you know, eliminating that and building healthier soil through cover crops is a great way to go. And it'll give you a better living, happy soil, you know, in the long term.
Great, thank you. Sorry again for the little bit of a detour, but I think we covered a lot of good stuff there.
Yeah, we can detour all day if we need to, no problem.
I do have one more vegetable question, and so from Ashley asking, when should I cut back or pull out the tomato plants and pepper plants for the season? So when's a good time to call it quits? You know, we've been having such nice weather lately.
Yeah, you know, I look at it as how do you want to you know, manage your crops going into the fall. I've started eliminating plants already. I think I did like maybe 8 tomatoes, 8 peppers. You know, we've gone through summer crops and eliminated those already. And you know, like the cucumbers, well, not the cucumbers, we didn't do those again in the fall, but like the peas, we'll let that stuff go real late. If I'm looking at a tomato plant and it doesn't have a real nice set of fruit on it right now to harvest in the next couple weeks, I'm going to look at that, you know, in the next couple days as something we're just going to eliminate. The problem at this point is the days are cooler, the sun is less, so the tomatoes are ripening at a slower pace. The peppers and most of the fruits that, you know, are piece bearing are going to start to slow down dramatically. And then, you know, all it takes is one frost to end all of this. You know, that the problem is trying to predict that is difficult, and we're afforded an extended growing season due to our proximity on the lake here. You know, but some of my growers in Middlefield, they had you know, back-to-back frosts this past weekend, and their growing season's over. So, you know, I'm looking at it as a time management thing. I'm going to start to eliminate a few plants here and there, and the ones that are happiest and the most fruitful, they're going to get a longer leash. But if you know, we feel like we took some of the hot peppers this week, and I just yanked the whole plant. They were loaded with fruit, and we'll end up processing or drying that fruit, and those peppers are done for the season.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we are now caught up on vegetable questions. So I think we can move forward to flowering presentation, and then I'll start to insert our flower questions.
Sounds good to me. So probably the number one plant we're dealing with questions on at any time of the year is hydrangeas, and it's super helpful if you can identify the plant you're dealing with. Hydrangea doesn't work when you come to me. It's a hell of a start. It's better than the green plant with blue flowers, or the green plant with white flowers. But if you look on the chart here on the right, it's really a wonderful guide. The proven winners do a really nice job with a lot of their plants, and they're on the cutting edge of flowering plant technology, and they probably yell at me for saying that, hey, we're doing other stuff as well. They do shrubs, they do vegetables. I can't speak to herbs or not, but they do a lot of annuals every year, and they've got this really nice chart that I stole from them. And it kind of guides you through the process of dealing with your hydrangeas throughout the year, and whether or not you should prune it. If anybody has questions on the hydrangeas, this would be a great time to get to them. I could go through the whole chart, or you could just read it and use it for what it's worth. But the big thing is identifying your hydrangea and treating them appropriately as according to the chart there.
Right now, we don't have any specific questions about hydrangea.
All right, fair enough. Then we will bump forward to the next slide. The next month, 6 weeks at the Garden Center will be a lot of questions as to what do we prune, what don't we prune. And general rule of thumb at this point is if it's going to bloom in the spring, you don't want to cut that back if you want that branch or that plant to flower the next spring. Pruning that you have to do because the plant's 2 feet into the driveway, or it's wrapping against the window all night and it's driving me nuts. I consider that to be pruning that you need to do, and you can go ahead and do it. You're not going to severely affect the overall well-being of the plant. But when you go to the yard and you start pruning your azaleas, your lilacs, your rhododendrons at this point in the season, you are eliminating blooms that you would enjoy next spring. We'll take the next slide. That's a rhododendron we're looking at there. Lilacs are the same. Unless they've really overgrown or outgrown their space, don't prune them if you want the blossoms for next spring at this point. Pruning them will remove the blooms. Reminder, we talked about it in terms of spreading disease. If you have diseased plants, disinfecting your pruners when you go between plants is going to be helpful. Usually 30 seconds in like a 10% bleach solution does it. We've used hand sanitizer a lot in years past, and now that we have a surplus of it around, I'm using that pretty consistently. Rubbing alcohol, the little pads to wipe them down are super effective. So, clean tools, eliminate the spread of disease. We can move forward. Azaleas, just another plant you don't want to prune at this point. If you need to prune it because of size or health constraints, go ahead, Allison.
Oh, no, no. Please disregard the voter registration link, which might come in handy for you that I just sent out as I was trying to send the hydrangea chart that we had. But if you need to vote, there's the link to the voter registration. So sorry about that. But you do now have a link to the chart about the hydrangeas.
Cool. Thank you for doing that. And yes, I agree. Get out and vote. Important stuff. So, next slide.
Yeah. Go.
Another thing to be doing in the garden here is great time to get out and start dividing perennials. You know, a lot of people ask about doing it in the spring. A lot of these plants is a great time when you're cleaning up and you're getting the space and seeing where the garden is and how things have grown in over the course of the summer to you know, get in there and start splitting them up and turning, you know, 4 cone flowers into 8 or 12. And, you know, you could take a hosta like the one on the left there and turn that into 3 or 4 hostas. And, you know, you want to, you know, make sure the plant's well watered. It's been a pretty dry fall for us, and getting water on them you know, hasn't come a lot from Mother Nature. But if you want to do it on Saturday, go out, you know, Friday night, give them a real good water, make sure the plants are well hydrated, and then get in there the next day and start digging. You know, something like a hosta or a daylily, you're gonna get in there and dig the whole plant up and knock some of the dirt away, and you should be able to almost see little eyes or small bulbs or tuber type root structure in there, and 2 or 3 of those should be adequate to get you a new plant the following spring and give you more to play with in your yard. We can go forward.
So Paul, I have a few questions kind of linked to this.
Go ahead.
So my first question is, when should I cut back my black-eyed Susans and Echinacea? I know we talked about if we want something to bloom in the spring, we should not cut them back. Is now an okay time for us to do that to our black-eyed Susans and our Echinacea?
So couple schools of thought on that. In a neat and tidy world, if that's your garden, go ahead and cut them back as soon as you know the flower is spent. You can cut the stem back, and then I really like seeing plants you know that fall or die due to a killing frost. You kind of complete the cycle of the plant for the year. There's plenty of people that, you know, you could probably cut back your coneflower and black-eyed Susan you know, in the next couple weeks and be just fine. But you know, the other benefit to that is by not cutting them back, you do you know, provide food for animals, you provide shelter for them, and you know, you do allow the top of that coneflower in the center here, all those little blips are ultimately seeds, and you can, you know, by allowing those to fall or by harvesting those, you can actually, you know, grow coneflowers from some of them. Some of the hybrids don't produce seed that is viable, but a lot of them do, and even if it's not viable to exactly what you had, a lot of times a newer coneflower will come back as what it was derived from or bred from, you know, be it generally a white or a purple coneflower. So really
great. And then another question. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, you're fine. I just said it depends where you want to be in your yard. You know, it's fountain grasses. I'm a big fan of letting the grass stay up all winter. There's a lot of people that can't stand having them flopping and sitting in the garden, and they'll be, you know, ripped out here in the next couple weeks. And you know, both schools of thought are fine by me.
And then a question I have is for dahlias or any plants that have tubers. What's a good way to, so I guess the ones that have to come out of the ground, how do we store them for next year? And then when should we put them back in the ground?
Okay, that's a tricky question. There's a lot of acceptable ways to put stuff away and store them. Ultimately, what I suggest people do is do some reading and come up with a method that they are most comfortable with, or maybe it involves materials that they have on hand. That you're getting close to the point where you'd want to dig up your dahlias. A killing frost on the foliage does not kill the tuber for the next year. Your canna lilies are the same. But then the big thing is it's tricky because you don't want them to dry out, but too much moisture rots them. You want to find a good, they called a lot of these things in our basements root cellars for a reason, because they kept a temperature and a moisture level where roots are happy to not wither and die. So a cool dark space kind of simulates the dormancy period, and then bringing them out is really kind of dependent upon spring in Cleveland, which is always kind of a crapshoot. I'd like, to think that if we were doing dahlias at my house and I wanted to enjoy dahlias from the basement the next spring, I'd probably bring them up and probably put them under light or in a sunny window in a pot, and really just start warming that bulb and that soil up as much as possible. The tropical plants are really quite health driven, or heat driven, I'm sorry. And, it's tough to gauge that. I would think I'd want to, time my dahlias or my tubers that I'm pulling out of my basement to go into the garden or a container. I think you want to, safely plan for the last week of May or the first week of that process. The ground temperature is so important, and every year that the ground warms at a different rate. I think we've had maybe 3 out of the past 5 years we've had pretty good snowfalls in May. Maybe not accumulation, but days where it flurries for the majority of the day, and rushing anything into that weather that's tropical, be it a tomato, a pepper, is not beneficial to that plant. It's going to sit there. It may not die, but ultimately it just fights for its life until the ground temperature gets up into the 60s, and the plants can really start taking off and growing. You good there, Allison?
Yes, we're all set. Thank you. We are caught up on questions.
All right, we'll bump forward. One other thing I think, and I know a lot of people forget to consider in the fall is planting your spring bulbs. It's a great way, and it's a relatively inexpensive way to add a lot of flair and color to the garden. At this point, I think a dozen, tulip bulbs would run you somewhere around $9. I'd say that's similar to 3 or 4 plants in pots at the garden center in the summer. You're looking at $10 versus, maybe as much as $60, $70 for 4 plants in the summer. And I think just remembering to get this stuff in the ground is a hurdle that people struggle with, and new gardeners are consistently coming into the store looking for tulips, looking for hyacinths as something they want in their yard, but they're coming in looking for them in March, April, and May, and the time for those is past. And now, up until the time that the ground's frozen is really a great time to get these bulbs in, and you don't have to water them much, if at all. You don't have to do anything for them throughout the course of the winter, other than keeping rabbits and chipmunks out of them. And if you choose the right bulb, that'll happen, naturally. The deer and the squirrels, they leave the daffodils alone. They usually leave the hyacinths alone. They favor tulips. It's a showy, pretty flower, but it's also a lot harder to grow than a daffodil or a hyacinth year in and year out. The older I get, the more I really enjoy daffodils. You plant them, they naturalize, they multiply, and nothing's eating them in the spring when they come to bloom. Even at the garden center here at Clarence in Detroit, I've come out and watched the deer eating my tulips, and can't really put up a huge fence. At that point I can chase them away or guard them all night. And the daffodils, when we plant them, they bloom. They're not, susceptible to crop failure unless we have a really, really wet season, and don't get a freeze. But other than that, I'm a big fan of the easier to grow plants. And, I don't want to say I don't enjoy a great show of tulips, because there's something to be said for that. But, bulbs are something I think at this year a lot of people omit from their garden plans.
Yeah, I have to say I always think about them too late. It's always on my to-do list, but it seems to never happen. So this is a good, friendly reminder. This is now the time to dig, drop, and then you're done.
All right, we can move forward. So roses is always a question as to how we prepare them for winter. At the garden center, I think this year we've sold out, but at this point in the year, I'd like to see people stop deadheading or removing the spent blossoms. Don't feed to encourage more blooms. What you want to do is really start helping the plant prepare for winter naturally, and that is ultimately going to be developing the rose hips and not introducing new wounds where disease or insects can infiltrate your plants. Look at them after you get in there, and maybe some of the leaves have started to drop. And look and see if there's branches that need to be removed for any reason, be it size, if you've got them growing out parallel to the ground, or maybe even growing down before they grow up, I'd remove those. Any branches that are kind of rubbing against each other and creating wounds when the wind blows, and then keeping good upward growth towards the bottom of that plant so air can circulate in there is really a nice way to help keep your roses healthy. Mulching them in is helpful. I want to hope you remember to use a relatively clean, uninfected mulch, and then you need to get that off of the plant early enough in the spring. And if you're dealing with something like black spot or powdery mildew that can be soil borne on your roses, as soon as it looks like the plant's going to start breaking dormancy and leafing out, you want to consider getting a good fresh layer of clean mulch under the plant so you can eliminate splatter transmission of the mildew or black spot by just keeping that barrier between the disease and the plant. If there's no questions on roses, we can move forward.
Yeah, we're all caught up. Yep.
So this guy is probably about a month from being a real pain to gardeners if they're not already. And to deal with deer effectively, you really kind of want to understand what they're doing right now and how to protect your plants against them. We go through, the winter, the spring, and the summer, mainly with them eating your plants for food. And that's a troubling thing to anybody that deals with the deer on a consistent basis, to come out and see your beautiful garden just disappear. The next thing that you're starting to see now is the bucks are going to start rubbing their felt off of their antlers if they haven't done so already, and to eliminate that felt, that covering that allows their antlers to grow. They use trees, they use shrubs, to sharpen and to clean and polish their antlers. And in doing so, they can really do a lot of damage to trees and shrubs. And the next step after that both the does and the bucks are going to do is they're going to start using your landscape to mark their turf. The does will rub their head on low-hanging branches. They will gum or just gently chew the edge of branches as a calling card for a potential mate that may be following. That, hey, here I am. I'm getting ready to look for a mate. And if you're in the neighborhood, this would be a good area for you to find me here in the next month or 6 weeks. The bucks do it more as a calling card to not only to the does but to other bucks that this is their territory and I will fight for it. And when you see the rubs on the trees, and the other sign you would look for is kind of a heart-shaped scrape where they take their front paws and they remove areas of soil or leaf or mulch underneath that branch that they've been using to leave their scent on. And then a lot of times they'll urinate in that spot to mark it as their territory. So I think that the big thing to realize here is if you want to keep something safe from deer, you need to consider an enclosure or a barricade that allows the deer not to stick his head into the tree or the shrub that you're trying to protect. And a lot of times that ends up being a perimeter of probably 3 to 4 feet, if not maybe even a little bit bigger, if that plant is really important to you to get through the winter. You need to keep them off of it, and the enclosure is ultimately the best way to do that. Any deer questions? I know we'll be dealing with a lot of these in the next month.
No specific deer questions. I guess my only question from hearing this description is what type of barrier, is it a little bit of chicken wire? Is it I need to build like a metal fence? How intense should my barrier be?
I think ultimately, you could stake chicken wire at the perimeter. If
Are you there, Paul?
Yep, I'm here.
You just dropped out for just a second. We heard you could use chicken wire, and then it dropped out for just a moment.
You can stake chicken wire. You could use a fence, and real similar to the one that I threw together with the 2x4s. Just something I'd say 3 to 4 feet that they can't just jump right over and into. But it also keeps their antlers and their mouth at a distance where they can't just go chew on the plant. It doesn't have to be super complex.
Okay, and then I did get a question, and I'm not sure, well, we'll have an answer to this, but we'll try our best. Someone said, my neighbors put out a salt block. Is there anything I can do to protect my yard?
Whew, there's a lot of different ways you can protect your yard. I guess, one of my first questions would be is do the deer use your yard as a path of travel to that salt block, salt lick? I think ultimately, chasing them away is not always a great idea when, you're looking at something with antlers like this, and you're dealing with hormones. I would suggest you not really go tangling with a deer who is very testosterone rich. Barricades, scents they find to be unpleasant, are good deterrents, but if they found that salt block and they know it's there, it's going to be a difficult way to, it's going to be tough.
Right. So he replied with, it's a highway for deer. So I'm going to do a little digging and look more into salt licks and if they're encouraged here in the city. So I'll get back to him. But I guess if there's anything, people have bought deer, anti-deer, like fox urine or wolf urine or something. Does that stuff work? Is that something he should be trying?
Some of it does, some of it doesn't. You're assuming, that your deer is familiar with that predator and the scent of their urine. We sell some repellents that are more like a mint base, a taste that they don't like, a scent that they don't like. And I think ultimately, if a fence in Lakewood, I don't think is super feasible for keeping deer out. I've seen deer, jump a 8-foot fence at a standstill. The fence to be prohibitive to them really needs to be at 10 feet tall, and I don't think you could put a 10-foot fence in Lakewood, at least not permanently. And then really just doing whatever you can to keep the environment inconsistent. Stuff that makes noise is good. We've used foil pie pans and punched holes in those, and just let them kind of bang on the tree in the wind. Of course, we use those out in the country where nobody's listening to them all night. It might get a little old, and your neighbors might not appreciate that sort of noise going on all night. I've seen some motion activated sprinklers that have pretty good success in chasing them out. It all depends, I guess, what level of disdain you have for the deer being in your yard.
Great, thank you.
We can bump forward. So here's one thing I think is still relatively pertinent. We're probably past the point where we're going to see a lot of people overwatering things as we get cooler and the water uptake is a lot less. Naturally, we just tend to water a lot less as well. But the danger, especially for a plant that like an arborvitae, they need and they will drink water, well into December, if not the new year, and they need to replenish that moisture if Mother Nature's not providing it for them. An inch a week at a slow trickle. I don't know how to quantify that into coming out of a garden hose. but usually, 10, 15 minutes per plant at a nice slow trickle. You want to see water going into the ground around the plant. You don't want to see runoff, and you want to see a decent saturation. Doing that to these plants once a week will help a lot, especially, in a windy town on a lake such as Lakewood. They'll lose water through the needles as the winter progresses, and our wind can be very, very difficult and trying for especially newly planted shrubs and trees and arborvitae especially. We can bump forward. So this is kind of what we touched on a little bit earlier, in terms of cleaning up the garden. And I think, this applies to both, garden beds and vegetable gardens, and ultimately you got to decide what works for you, and how you do it. Cleaning up in a windy environment, like this can be a continual process all winter. From experience, we don't have a single oak tree on the property at the garden center, and I don't think there's one within 100 yards, but we continually could clean up oak leaves at the garden center on a week.
Are you there, Paul? Okay, we're just going to take just a brief pause here. Imagine there's amazing hold music being played right now. Are you there, Paul?
My connection says it's been restored. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now. Yes. So you were talking about sweeping up oak leaves that there's no oak tree near you, and you were sweeping up. You could sweep them up every week.
Yeah, and your cleanup basically just needs to revolve around your lifestyle. I don't think you need to be out there every week in January raking leaves if we don't have snowfall. But getting the majority out of there will certainly make the cleanup and the breeding ground for disease a lot easier to deal with in the spring. And if you're gonna mulch, get good disease-free, clean material, be it mulch. If you've got leaves that fall and you want to mulch them up in the winter, and roses are freshly them and
So Paul, I think you're losing your connection again. I'm just going to have you pause for just a moment. Okay, think you're back on now. And you were talking about composting up leaves and other things that you could then put on your garden.
Mulch if you're relatively sure they're pretty clean and disease free, and that insulating the plants is a good way to go into the winter. And then the one thing you want to remember, if we go cold and dry and windy, that a little bit of water can go a long way in helping your garden. I know from my own experience, I don't like going over to the garden center, when it's 34 degrees, recharging the water lines, dragging a hose, stumbling through everything, watering everything, getting all the water out of the hose, emptying the water lines again, and seeing if I can save, a few plants. I'd much rather start new than put that sort of time and effort into what I consider to be my vacation. It's just not pleasant or fun to do. So, at the farm, we'll mulch a lot of that stuff in, and if it makes it through the winter, great. If it doesn't, I'm sorry, but I'm not, busting a hole in the ice in the pond to get some water down.
Oh, come on, Paul.
Yeah,
I feel like you should want to do
bust the hole, but we're gonna go fishing if that's what we're doing. So
that.
let's bump through. It's also possible we're at the end. Yeah, one thing I would like to take a quick minute and just, let people know that if you're looking for Christmas stuff and you want to get in line for a wreath or a tree early, we're taking Christmas orders on our website now, and we're punching through e-commerce, so we're learning, and we appreciate everybody's patience that's learning with us. But we going through this spring, we wanted to have an online option for our customers who might be at risk, or not knowing if we're going into just the uncertainty headed into the winter, that we have options for people to buy Christmas trees and wreaths and roping and garland and never step foot in the store, and we can handle everything over the website. And the other big reason is most things that have happened at a garden center since this pandemic began has been on just such a greater scale than it was at the same time last year. And I'm concerned about what the availability and how long we'll be able to keep trees in stock this year. And I think that, combined with a tree shortage to begin with, and a lot of people spending more time in their homes and putting up trees in years that they may not have otherwise, I suspect most fresh Christmas decorations and decor are going to be quickly consumed by the general public this year. So keep that in mind as we go into that time of year. And if there's any questions, I'd be glad to take them now. I always struggle with putting these things together. I think ultimately questions from you guys are a much better way to go, and it addresses a little bit more of what your concern is. I could also say that we spent a lot of time this year in food preservation in terms of canning and dehydrating and freezing. I'd be glad to talk to anybody about that, right now or at the store. And unless you guys have something for me, I think I'm good to go.
Okay, we do have a few questions. And so one of them is, any tips for trimming and general care for well-established globe arborvitae?
I don't have, that would be one I would look up. At the tip of my tongue, I don't have the pruning instruction for a globe arborvitae. I suppose if it were mine, I'd go in there and selectively, choose some branches that allowed me to prune the bush back to where I wanted it to be. And kind of do it a little bit more naturally than getting in there with, head shears and really just shaping those up. But that's the way I do it. And if I were doing those at my house, I would certainly read on them to make sure that it was safe to do so today. Just sorry for not having that answer for you.
Great. So Ashley, if you want to reach out on Instagram or visit the website, you might be able to connect with Paul directly, or Paul, if you'd like, I can get you Ashley's email so you can connect if you would like. And then
email, so I will apologize for that up front. The phone number is probably the easiest way. I probably won't be back at the store till Monday at this point, but I'd be glad to. I'm kind of embarrassed I don't have that answer, and as soon as we're done here, I'm going to have the answer. Just doesn't do us any good right now.
No problem. That's a perfectly fine, acceptable answer. Okay, so another question we have is there a treatment for powdery mildew on lilac?
I think that, the big thing for, treating the powdery mildew on lilacs is, is a good cleanup. You know, make sure that if leaves are sticking on that lilac after we've had a good frost, you get them out of there. You get them, you know, raked up. You get them, you know, in a lawn and leaf bag. I wouldn't put diseased foliage into my compost pile. And then I would look at either the powder or a spray next spring, and you could even use the you know, the powder around the base of that, and a good fresh layer of mulch to resist the splatter.
Now, Paul, I'm not sure if you can hear me or not. Okay, I think you can now. So do you sell those treatments, the powder or the spray, at Lakewood Garden Center?
Yes, absolutely. The powder or the spray at this point in the season, I wouldn't look for this year. I'd wait till next spring. And
great. I think we are now caught up with questions. Any other questions, please feel free to send them through this way. I think we're in the process of wrapping up this conversation. Paul, thank you so much for taking your time with us today. I know it's a busy time for you, and we're getting tons of wonderful feedback for your presentation. We appreciate you. We're so glad that you're part of the Lakewood community, and we thank you for spending time with us today.
Anytime. It's you know, it's fun to be.
Okay, I think we're having some technical problems, and I'm so sorry, because Paul, you just ooze such kindness and thankfulness. So thank you, Paul. Thank you all for joining us today and asking such great questions. We'll definitely bring Paul back next year. I'm hoping we'll have to get together and think about some topics, but these workshops are always well received. So thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone. And we wish you well. And we will have some upcoming workshops. We're in the process of finalizing those to wrap up the Knowing Your Home season for 2020. So thank you all so very, very much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your beautiful Saturday. Take care.